This is eerily silent.
I
This is really weird.
could turn on some music.
Actually, it is now 7. So do we have a quorum? Do we, Auden, do we have a quorum?
I'm sorry, I'm sharing my screen, so I'm not able to see the participants list.
Hold on. I'll
Maybe call it out. Call them out.
Let's see.
I'm counting.
Yes, we have a quorum.
We have
Yeah,
a
there's
quorum.
9 of us so far, so
We have a quorum.
we got
Yeah.
quorum.
Okay, well, if I'd like to go ahead and begin just to keep us on track with time. Since we do have a quorum, let's just go ahead. I'm calling the Cities Association of Santa Clara County meeting to order. And if at 7:01, and if we could just do a roll call of who is present.
Okay. Bybee. Bybee is absent. Chow. Chow is absent, and Blankley is absent as well. Fliger. Fliger is present. Mock.
Present.
Mock is present. Sayok.
Here,
Sayok is present. Montano.
Here.
Montano is present. Turner.
here.
Turner is present. Constantine.
Present.
Constantine's present. Abakoga.
Here.
Abakoga is present. Dubois. Dubois is absent. Jones.
Present.
Jones is present. Becker.
Present.
Becker is present. Zhao.
Here.
Zhao is present. And Klein.
Present.
Klein is present. And we have a quorum.
Auden, Cupertino's representative has arrived as well.
Okay, great. And who is that?
Hi. Yang Chow.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. First item on business is our consent agenda. So I'd like the council member to our board to see if anyone would like to pull anything from our consent agenda. I see no hands raised, so I turn to our public and see if anyone would like to make any comment on our consent agenda, which consists of our meeting minutes, our financial statement, and invoices to be paid. I see no hands raised, and so I look to the board for a motion for approval.
So moved, Constantine.
Second. Koga.
So Constantine and Abikoga.
Okay. And Jones.
Aye.
Jones. I. Turner.
Yes.
Turner. I. Fliger.
Yes.
Fliger. I. Constantine.
Aye.
Constantine. I. Zhao. Saratoga.
Aye.
Zhao. I. Becker.
Aye.
Becker. I. Klein.
Aye.
Klein. I. Abakoga.
Aye.
Apakoga, I. Mock.
Aye.
Mock, I. Chow.
Aye.
Chow, I. Sayak.
Aye.
Sayak, I. And Montano.
Aye.
Montano, I. And did anyone else join us since we took the vote?
I did not see anyone else, but Andy, can you confirm? Or I guess anyone that was not called.
I think we're okay.
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you. Consent agenda passed. Okay, so if, as you noticed today on today's agenda, I only placed one item on our agenda for tonight. And that is on, just so that we have understanding of our financial situation. And so I just want to make sure that all of our board members understand where we are financially with our budget. We'll go into some time on that. And then we'll have a discussion on how to address the challenge that we're about to present to you. And then we'll have some discussion. I do want to acknowledge before we begin that in our public comments that we have received to date, we did have a request from the chair of the roundtable for a continuance of this item. And so a lot of the decisions that are going to be discussed today, I want to stress, are the financial situation of the Cities Association. We're not talking about the merits of the roundtable. But there are certain financial decisions we have to make that bears on our future for the next couple of months. And so for that reason, I am going to keep today's agenda and we'll proceed as planned. And as there's questions along the way, certainly I'd like all of you to ask them of us because we want to make sure everyone understands since this affects all of your city's funds, and we want to make sure we're spending those funds properly and in line with the priorities that we've identified earlier this year. Okay. And so, before we begin, any questions just on logistics? And if you could raise your electronic hand, since I won't be able to see people's faces with the screen share. Okay, I see none. So let's go ahead and go to, we'll go through our staff report. And first item is if we can, we're going to do a closed session report. If we can move to the next slide. And I'm going to ask Mr. Baum to just report out on what we discussed at closed session.
Oops.
Yes,
Sorry.
Madam President and members of the Board of Directors, at our last closed session of the Executive Committee, there was approved a contract for $6,000 with the firm of Johnson, Rovella, Retterer, Rosenthal, and Giles to retain Ren Noski to monitor the investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Baum.
That's it.
Okay, and if we could move to our next slide.
I'm having navigation issues today.
Okay, and so if I can, I'd like to turn the mic over to Mayor Fleiger and to our director to just go through our fiscal situation and the bottom line we've provided here on this slide for all of you.
Thank you, President Sayok, and I am going to have the executive director lead us in the presentation, and I'll be here to support her. Andy, if you want to get us started.
Okay, great. Thank you. So today I would just like to share with you some of the challenges that we are facing as a cities association. I have some FAQs at the end of the report to make sure that you understand our budget versus we have a general fund budget that is just the operating costs of the cities association. It pays my salary, it pays for Auden, it pays for our legal, and it pays for things like software, Zoom, and all the other things in banking. So today we are talking about the Cities Association budget. And it was difficult for me to, we had a lot of lagging bills that weren't coming in, and our fiscal year ended at the end of June. But now that most of those bills are in, our legal budget last year was was budgeted for $23,000, and currently our expenditures to date are $47,000. Our total budget is only $10,000 over budget, but that is because we didn't have any expenditures related to our events. And so we were able to absorb some of those costs. However, at this continued rate, and what you can see in your packet is at this continued rate, at the end of next fiscal year, our budget, we would be down to about a month's in reserve. And so we had this discussion with the executive board on Friday. And Nisa, would you like to tell them what the executive board is recommending? And then we'll go through some other pieces of our budget for everyone to understand.
Yeah, that sounds great. And thanks for that, Andy. And just to recap, based on the budget projections that Andy just shared, we discussed it at our executive board meeting on Friday, and this was the recommendation coming out of the executive board. And it's on the screen, but I'll quickly summarize. Essentially, the executive board is recommending that the full board directs the roundtable to pay all bills, legal, investigation, and staff bills related to roundtable work and subject matter areas. And we also discussed that because the roundtable actually has not done its budget for this year, that they include these amounts in the budget so that the roundtable board can approve the budget with these amounts and then invoice the individual roundtable cities for the amounts. And so that was the recommendation coming out of the executive board to this full board to also support and approve.
So we just wanted to make sure everybody could see who the members are and who are not members of the roundtable. So the members of the roundtable, it is 8 of our cities plus the county, and then there are 7 cities that are not members. Is that okay? Can I move on, or would you like me to leave that? Okay.
Next slide.
The cost overruns that we're having in legal are because of unanticipated costs that we are incurring on behalf of the roundtable. And so when you look at some of the entities, it was requested that we show you who these entities are. And so these are what you will see the bills for. And in
Just to add to,
go ahead.
No, just to add to that, Andy, just for purposes of this slide. So when we talk about the legal bills that we're incurring that are over budget and the ones that are associated with the roundtable, this slide provides the list of entities where the bills are directly related to roundtable. So for example, you will see Gary Baum, Kat Wellman, and Cities Association staff also on this slide. All 3 entities or individuals have also done work for the roundtable. And so that's why they're also included on this slide. But just to emphasize what the executive board is recommending, we're only recommending that the roundtable pays for the bills related to work performed for the roundtable or related to the roundtable. And the 3 entities at the top, Kramer, Liebert, and Johnson, they have performed services related directly to the roundtable.
And then I just wanted to remind you that in January of 2020, at the board of directors did direct me to bill all staff time spent on anything related to the roundtable and bill that to the roundtable. And that was in large part because in November, we received an audit by the City of San Jose auditors, and they identified that we were incurring a lot of staff time costs on behalf of the roundtable. And so, which meant that the cities who aren't members are subsidizing the roundtable.
And another thing to highlight here is, we're still, these different entities are still performing legal services and other work related to the roundtable. So the bills that we're sharing today are the bills today. We do expect that there will be ongoing bills because of the continuing investigation and associated legal work with regards to that investigation.
And Nisa, you're breaking up just a little bit, and I don't know if it's on my part. So just wanted to highlight that. And then just because I know Auden can't see who's on our screen, Palo Alto representative has it arrived. And so if you could just mark that as well.
Yep, I'm here. Thanks. Sorry I'm late.
Great,
Okay,
thank you.
so
Thank you,
any
Michael.
questions to date before we continue moving on? Yes, Mayor Zhao?
Yes, I have several questions. I know we have several legal firms are doing investigation. I'd like to understand what kind of investigation are they doing and what kind of outcome are we looking for? That's question number one. What kind of budget?
And why don't we take them one at a time? That one, Mr. Baum, can you answer that one for us? So that, because I know there's certain rules that we want to
Certainly.
honor.
We obviously need to respect the privacy of the people that are involved and their privacy rights. There's an investigation of a hostile work environment issue that's being conducted, and we're expecting a written report on that.
And the question with regard to
Then what?
outcome, would you like to
What
answer that?
outcome are we trying to achieve?
Well, we're required when we are provided with allegations of a hostile work environment to investigate and determine if there's any truth to that, and then to take whatever appropriate measures that we can to protect the employees that are involved. So I think what we would expect would be a written report, and then the board would have to determine how to deal with it from there.
Okay, what kind of, I mean, I think this is kind of new to me, the roundtable and the relationship with cities association. Now I see, the budget for the legal services is going to continue to grow with so many firms are involved. I don't know who's doing what. It looks like quite a few legal, law firms are involved in this investigation. Do we have a timeline and, when this is going to be done and how much are we going to be putting this in our budget for next year or even year after? I just kind of like to understand where we're going with this investigation.
Sure. And Gary, would you like to answer that or me?
Yeah, I'll attempt again to answer it we all need to recognize that this is a private matter and that we don't want to harm any of the people that are involved of all of the people involved. Just to tell who the parties are, the Cities Association retained Liebert Cassidy Whitmore to start and monitor an investigation. They retained Kramer Investigations to do that investigation. Now, this was all prior to my time, so this is what I've been told. Liebert Cassidy determined in mid-July that they had a conflict. They felt they had a conflict of interest, so we were required to hire a new firm, and that's why the Johnson, so I get the name right, the Johnson, Ravella, Rederer, Rosenthal, and Giles firm was hired. Kat Wellman was the interim general counsel, and she had to deal with whatever she had to deal with in that, as well as I have had to. So that's the parties that are involved. Kat is no longer working for us. That was because she was intentionally designed to be an interim, and I've taken on her role. We've retained a new firm to monitor Kramer, and we are hoping, with our fingers crossed, for investigation to be concluded by the end of September, but these things take as long as they take.
So you mentioned that there's a conflict of interest. Of course, I don't see any, and I guess it was a private matter. It was never disclosed to the board members. So what I'm trying to get is, what are the possible actions at the end of the investigation? I mean, what are we going to do at the end? I mean, what possible actions we need to take? after we're spending all the monies on this legal firm, so what are we trying to do at the end of the investigation?
And would you like to answer that, Gary, or would you like for me to answer that?
Well, yeah, I'd rather not answer it, but I'll
Okay.
try. I probably will have to defer to you at that point. I don't have a crystal ball. So the report's going to come out and then it will be provided to our executive board and I presume ultimately the entire board of directors, and you'll have to determine how you want to handle it from there. Without knowing what the results are, and the last thing we want to do is prejudge this or predetermine it. It's really difficult for me to answer that question.
And I'll just add on a little bit of context. As a cities association, when legally we had to pursue this investigation, and so we brought this issue to the full board in closed session, and the full board agreed that we had to continue in this direction. And so we are finishing what we started. Once the results come back, I think there, again, as Gary mentioned, we need to decide what to do with it without understanding what's in the report. It's hard to predict, and it's hard to predict what we should do. But I know as a city, it's different. Cities association is difficult. These aren't our employees, and so we need to work in a somewhat different way, which is why we had to hire a third party to help provide a buffer between the cities association's knowledge and the privacy of those that are being investigated. If I can, I'd love Town Manager Pravetti to help provide more context on what a city normally does should information like this come to light, and what a town manager would be doing with if it were an employee that made these allegations. Laurel, if you could.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for the questions. As Mr. Baum mentioned, we have an obligation as an employer to do a thorough investigation when there is an allegation of a hostile work environment. We don't have a choice. We have to do the investigation. So as the board president mentioned, in closed session, counsel was hired, and that was reported out in open session, and the investigation is currently underway. We don't know what the outcome of it will be. We keep a very open mind. That is the purpose of an investigation. We let a third party handle the necessary interviews and other data collection. They compile all of that in a report, and then it is provided to the executive board to determine if the allegations are sustained or not, or if some of them are sustained or not. So there's many different outcomes that could happen. As Mr. Baum said, it's hard to predict, but we do have an obligation, a legal obligation to complete the investigation. And now that we've got the legal staff in place, things are starting back up. So I'm hopeful that we just have one more bill, I think, from Liebert Cassidy. The June bill has arrived. We have not yet seen the July bill, and then we should be done with those bills. I believe we have all of Kate Wellman's bills, so that engagement has been concluded. And then the board has taken action to hire the other overseeing attorney for the investigation. And this is, again, this is an obligation that we have to take seriously as an employer, and we'll take the necessary next steps as a board when the results are completed. Thank you.
Just real quick, thank you for your explanation. Just one real quick. I understand, as an employer, we have the, legal obligation to investigate. I'm not doubting that part. Let's say, at the end of, if it's the allegation is true, what's our action? It's dissolve the roundtable, or I mean, I'd like to understand what are we trying to achieve, one way or another. I mean, that's in general, we have some kind of general idea. Let's see, if approved one way or another, we have to know, what, I'm not talking about what actions we need to take, but we have to have what are we trying to do? Dissolve this, or are we continue to, I don't want to, our each city, which is part of roundtable, continue to pay, and we don't even know where the end is, right? I mean, So that's what I am watching out for my city.
Yeah, and Mayor Zhao, I appreciate that, and that's exactly why this is a agenda item today, because there are certain costs that need to be spent because of the investigation, but there are other costs associated with Roundtable, and this is why this item is being brought to all of you, because ultimately these costs are our costs collectively, and we need to decide collectively how to continuing. And again, that's why I put this on today's agenda. Once you see where we are financially, what we have remaining, and then I think that'll help provide clarity. And then hopefully with the discussion, we could decide how to move forward. But I hear your question, and hopefully we'll start to answer and have some discussion on that. So.
All right, thank you.
And Vice Mayor Chow?
Hi. So do we have itemized the list of the legal bills and the staffing cost? I don't think I see that in the agenda packet.
I'm sorry, repeat the question one more time. Do we have
itemized the list, or at least grouped by the expenses for the different attorneys or the different cases or the staffing costs? Do we have itemized list for that? So
each of the invoices that have been sent provide a level of information, correct?
Okay. Then second question is, I think each board usually approve the budget, and then the staff usually would not conduct any work unless the work is approved by the board. So now the expenses for the work done by cities association staff, are those work approved by the Roundtable board?
And I'm not sure I understand the question. So
I think when each city approve, like we approve a budget, we have work items, and we have estimate how much those items would cost, and then we approve the budget annually, right? And in case there's any other adjustment, usually the city manager or executive director will come to the board, get approval before they spend money to conduct further work on any of the work items. So on the items that are exceeding the budget, that we are trying to say a Roundtable should be responsible. So I'm asking, are those works approved by the Roundtable for that amount?
I can't speak for the Roundtable. I'm just
has
exactly what I'm doing.
Even
Vice
how
Mayor
much
Chow
work
is the costs that are being reviewed were approved by our board, and so now this board is discussing how to address those bills. That's the purpose of today's conversation.
So Roundtable board did not approve those expenses, right? Okay. Now the next question. Who are the employers of the employee that has filed the complaint? Who hired that employee?
Gary, considering the confidentiality,
right? Cities Association is
Vice Mayor Chow, excuse me, I'm asking our attorney, given the confidentiality of and the sensitivity, I don't feel comfortable answering specifics of the investigation. Would you like to just provide a general overview? And I think we need to move on. We're not talking about the
I'm
investigation
simply
itself.
asking the employee involved is an employee of Cities Association, right? It's not employee of any of the city or the Roundtable. It's an employee hired by the Cities Association. That's not confidential. This is public record.
Well, it certainly involves the people involved. All were doing work for the Roundtable. Can you give me a second? You can give me a second to finish, please?
Can you first answer?
Vice
Who
Mayor, I
hired
think
these
he's trying to answer your question, so please give him the space to
Can
answer.
you answer this specific question first? Who signed the contract with this employee to hire his employee? Who signed the employment contract?
Well, the roundtable is not capable of signing any contracts because they're not an entity. So any contracts that were entered into on behalf of the roundtable were signed and executed by, is my understanding, because I've only been around for 2 months, by the Cities Association.
You mean this employee perform work exclusively for the roundtable?
I'm not aware of any employee who works for the roundtable exclusively.
Yeah, so this employee is employed by the Cities Association, do some work for the roundtable, correct? And who interviewed this employee and decide to hire this employee? Not the roundtable board or their staff. It's the Cities Association board and staff who interviewed this employee, entered into an employment contract to hire this employee, correct?
You know, I think
Are you done?
Mr. Baum, would you like to answer it? I think we're moving beyond the subject. We're moving beyond.
No. I think I'm trying to clarify who is responsible. So here's a hypothetical situation. So for example, we have a city employee, let's say it's Bob. And then we hire the contractor, let's say working on general plan. And then there is some conflict and dispute. And then someone complained hostile, so the city employee, Bob, complained hostile work environment because that contractor were rude to Bob. Now,
I understand where you're going. Vice Mayor, I'm going to cut this off now. We're not going to talk about hypotheticals. We have already approved.
No, this passage is very relevant.
No, Mayor, you're interrupting me now, okay? I'm trying to get to the issue at hand, which is our budget. So please, we are trying to focus on the budget issue. There will be time for discussion. We've already approved certain items that are related to the investigation. We are trying to make sure that we honor the sensitivity and the confidentiality of those involved. And so we are now going to move on to specific questions on how to proceed on the bills that are being listed.
That's why I'm asking these questions.
Please raise them privately with us.
My question is very relevant to this question. So the city hired Bob. And then the hostile.
Vice Mayor Chow, you are repeating.
No, we are saying that
the same
this
issue.
consultant have to be responsible for the city's legal fee. That's unreasonable.
You need to stop. No,
I think it's time to move on. I think we're off the topic.
We're off topic.
Under the Brown Act, we're off the topic. I think it's time to move on.
Yeah. Councilmember Abikogo.
Thank you. I have comments, but I'll hold them till later and ask the question I have regarding Whitmore Cassidy. I guess we've incurred legal costs from them, but I guess I'm not clear as to what they actually did because they informed us that they couldn't do the investigation due to conflict of interest, and then it sounds like that conflict should have been known from the beginning anyway. So. What are we paying for, and is there any recourse, or can we challenge any of the fees that they've been charging, unless there was an actual product that was produced from their work?
I'm not. They declared the conflict on July 15th, and this was Maureen Jacob from Liebert Cassidy. Her claim was that since they represented some of the cities that were involved that had council members who may be subjects of these possible interviews in the investigation, that this was a conflict for them. I pointed out to her that I didn't really believe it was a conflict, but if it was, it certainly existed at the first day because it was known at that time that there was council members involved from various cities. At this point, I haven't seen really any of their bills, so I really can't comment. I do think we may have some issues on any new bills. And we haven't paid, well, I haven't seen any new bills. We haven't paid the latest bills. So there may be some arguments to be made on some of the newer bills.
Thank you. Yeah.
They, as far as I know, she was monitoring the investigation, but I really couldn't speak to whether that was done or not done.
So was the investigation actually started under Lieber Cassidy?
It was started under Liebert Cassidy, and then it stopped before I came on board, and then we were able to, with an awful lot of help from town manager Pravetti, get it started again.
So is there any, any product from Liebert Cassidy's work on the investigations?
Since it's all before my time and I haven't seen their bills, and I'm not very, despite the way it might sound, I'm not very familiar with this matter. I haven't read everything intentionally because I don't wish to be involved any further and spend additional dollars.
Sure. Okay.
So I really don't know, but we certainly will be scrutinizing any newer bills.
Okay.
And I believe I'm allowed to speak to that. All the bills that were coming, Councilmember Abikoga, it was to hire Kramer to set up the parameters and to set up the scope of work of the actual investigation, because we wanted to make sure it was limited and focused because it can go in so many different directions. So she did begin that work. Investigation did begin. I believe it is during the course of what was discovered where the conflict of interest was discovered.
Thank you.
And any further questions? Yes, Mayor Zhao?
I think I wanted to ask this earlier, just basically, what is our budget for the legal costs for the next year?
Okay, so why don't we move, that's a great segue into our next slide.
That's what I want to know, how much is it going to cost?
Yes. If we can move to the next slide.
Great question. Are you hearing me, President Sayoc? Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Good. So if Executive Director Jordan can pull up the slides again, we can continue going through. And again, just to bring back the purpose of this agenda item, it's really to propose to the full board that we have the roundtable pay the bills for work done associated with the roundtable. And so, the questions raised regarding Liebert and what the outcome may be, as the president and our attorney has said, that those are separate questions. What we're really asking the board to approve tonight is whatever those bills are, and this full board approve moving forward with this investigation. We are asking the full board to approve having the roundtable pay those bills associated with work for the roundtable. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear what the ask was. And so as we go through the slides, this is the total cost incurred by the Citizens Association on behalf of the roundtable to date. The dollar amounts are there. Should we move to the next slide, Andy? I think it's the next slide that has the, yes. So to Mayor Zhao's question, a couple months ago, Executive Director Jordan and I presented the budget. And as a reminder, at the time, we did flag for the board that there was a strong likelihood that we would different options that we may need to pursue based on that budget approval discussion. At the current spend rate, at the end of this fiscal year, we will have only 1 month of reserves, assuming the roundtable does not pay the bills that we highlighted in the previous slide. So the board knows our bylaws approved by the full board call for a 6 to 9 months reserve amount. And so if, again, the roundtable does not pay the bills that we're asking tonight, we will be down to 1 month of reserves. And that also does not factor in potentially more legal bills, which could mean we have no reserves and actually no funds left in our budget to cover any additional services or expenses that may come up for the rest of the year. If the roundtable reimburses the Citizens Association for the amounts related to the roundtable work, then we will have reserves I think it's from 3 to 3.5 months. So still not the 6 to 9 months that are in our bylaws, but at least it would increase our reserves to 3 to 3.5 months of reserves. The last bullet point that the executive director has there says we had budgeted $50,000 for legal bills a couple of months ago, and we had estimated approximately $10,000 for the joint powers agreement, and that's something that we've been working on, and it's very important from a legal perspective that we get that done. And so part of that legal budget had projected $10,000 for legal work related to the JPA, and then an additional $32,000 for just general counsel work, like what Gary provides for us. As we know, based on the previous slides, the legal work has exceeded these two line items. And so that's why we're in excess of the $50,000 that we had initially budgeted. Anything else here, Executive Director Jordan?
No, I don't think so.
If we go to the next slide. And so our recommended motion, and we said it at the beginning again, is to ask the full board to approve having the roundtable pay the bills associated with work done for the roundtable. And, you know, I want to say two things. One, you know, even if the Cities Association had the budget to cover these costs, I can't speak for the executive board, but I do believe, I can speak for myself that because this work was related to the roundtable, I do support the roundtable paying these bills regardless. So, you know, people may say it's because the Cities Association has a shortfall this year while we're going to the roundtable to pay these bills. It's actually because the roundtable that the executive board feels strongly that the roundtable should cover these costs. But in addition to that point, we do have a huge shortfall because of these bills associated with work done for the roundtable, or these bills as we believe they should. And the Cities Association is close to running out of funds to provide the services that we all have been doing for the past many years that we've been in existence, and we would like to continue doing.
So that's a great area to pause. And I want to recognize that Councilmember Montano has a question about do they have enough in their budget and are willing to pay their fair cost. We'll get into that and answer that when we get into the update from Mayor Klein and Vice Mayor Jones on the work that they've been doing with the ad hoc committee. So I just want to recognize that. And the next question, I want to, actually, it's not Tom, it's Eric from Palo Alto, council member.
Yeah, thanks very much. I want to ask a hypothetical question. So what action would the executive board take? I mean, what direction would we take if we thought it was likely that we would not be able to recover costs from the roundtable? What would we be doing the same thing we're doing right now?
That's a good question, because if they do not pay, and that's part of the later conversation, we basically, as we've shown you, at our current burn rate, we will have less than a month of reserve, and we will not have any funds to carry into fiscal year 22. And so I'm going to be very direct, Cities Association will close its doors. And so by essence, Roundtable will close its doors because we are their fiscal agent. So this is why we are presenting this to you, because we're in a pretty significant financial situation. Now,
wait a second. I mean, if we thought we weren't going to be able to recover money from the roundtable, and we thought that if we kept spending money going after the roundtable, the Cities Association would simply die. Right?
No, we would not have funds, legal funds, to continue the work that we've identified. Correct.
Okay. Will Cities Association still be around, or will Cities Association be bankrupt and not able to do anything?
Well, cities, and those are the options that will be presented later. There are several ones that we've highlighted. One is we request additional funds from each city. We request additional funds for roundtable cities to pay certain costs. Another cost is we don't ask for any more funds from our cities because we all know the financial situation cities are in. So there are several that have been identified, and as an entity, we would decide on that together.
Is anybody, am I the only one that sort of thinks this sounds really, really weird that we're pursuing a strategy that has, you know, a significant risk that the city association simply runs out of money, right? And, you know, if we're, I mean, if there's a significant risk of that, why would we continue down a path that, you know, paints ourselves into a corner like that? I mean, is that really the only option, right? I mean, does the roundtable, is the roundtable more important than keeping the cities association solvent?
And that's a great question, Councilmember Filseth. And so that is one of the options, is to ask the roundtable to separate from the roundtable. I'm sorry, to ask the roundtable to separate from cities association. That is one of the options, yes.
And can I just highlight one of the options you mentioned, President Sayat? It's the option area that we had in the last slide. So assuming, and you're right, you know, we're doing what we can as a board to the full extent that we can to get the roundtable to pay these costs. As we showed in the previous slide, if the roundtable, for whatever reason, refuses to pay that amount or you know, pays only a partial amount, then we will be down to 1 month of reserves. And that's where the Cities Association would be. And then we would have to then have a discussion as a board, the different options President Sayat just mentioned, one being, do we go back mid-fiscal year to the individual cities and ask them to contribute more mid-year in order to boost our budget so that we can survive the rest of this fiscal year based on the anticipated expenses. So we are, as an executive board, considering other options if the roundtable refuses to pay the amount. But we really want the support of the full board saying that the roundtable should pay this amount, because this work is related to the roundtable. The roundtable has its own budget. The roundtable cities are a subset of the Cities Association. And so even when we look at the other options, if the roundtable refuses to pay this amount, it will involve the roundtable cities to make up the shortfall. So we are considering those options, Eric.
Well, I mean, it seems like we ought to have that kind of plan in place kind of now, because
yes.
I mean, we're spending money, and you know, I think, you know, if it were just up to us in Palo Alto, I can't be certain that we would want to continue on the path that we're doing, knowing that there's a significant chance it's going to lead to basically the city association being insolvent and having to go out to member cities sort of cap in hand again. So I think we're you know, I'm wondering what other options are, because like that doesn't seem like, it's sort of one of those if A then death, if not A then death kind of things. And you know, we got to have some other options in that, right? I mean, and
to your point, that is again why today this is.
I mean, you can imagine that at some point we get so desperate and so extreme, we paint ourselves in such a corner that now we have to go out and try to sue the city or sue the roundtable, right? And you know, run up even more expenses, right? So, I mean, wait a second.
Right, and we'll definitely get to those discussions. We just wanted to make sure everyone understood our financial situation. That is the reason for today's meeting. Mayor Zhao?
Okay, this is, to me, it's very not logical at all. And for one, and all those legal expenses that city association authorized, I'm not sure, you know, roundtable has agreed with all those expenses that, you know, authorize all those work that we asked them to pay. That's first thing, because if they didn't authorize to hire all those legal things, we can't charge them, right? They didn't authorize our city association to do all this work. Now we ask them to pay. That's question one. Secondly, and I am not sure I want to continue to be a roundtable city. I am definitely going to withdraw. I mean, this is my first year with representing my city. But if I know the cost of the legal fees going to continue to grow, and I have no way knowing what the result is going to be, and I'm just continue to pay, I don't think this is a very logical way for us to continue this path. That's just how I feel right now. I'm just don't see any. I agree with Eric. It gotta be a better option. We're just calling all this legal expenses, and that we know roundtable won't be able to pay, and they're not gonna pay. Then what are we gonna do? I would just continue to ask each city to pay more dues. I think at this point, I mean, our city is, I don't know other cities, but I don't think we have this extra fund. I can pay more dues for city associations. So just my kind of 2 cents right now. I just feel frustrated if we continue the path we're going. I don't see a real resolution at the end of the path. I don't see we can actually solve anything at the end of the investigation. I mean, just going to be humongous, legal fees. And we're going to ask each city to, I know probably roundtable, where do they get all the funds? They don't. We are the physical agency. So we are charging ourselves more and continue this path. So a little bit frustrated. I just don't know how we got this far. And we continue to say hire more, continue to do more legal investigation, and we're going to just, kill ourselves basically at the end.
Yeah.
Sorry, just a little bit of frustration.
No, and I appreciate the frustration. We're all frustrated. And I think, again, that's why as a full board, we have to decide how to proceed, because what we don't want is we don't want to continue in a path that feels like we're just wasting everyone's money. And so next speaker, Mayor Constantine. Next question.
Thank you, Chair. Would this be an appropriate time to talk about the roundtable's relationship with the City Association?
Yes, but before we do, I will call back to you. I just want to make sure if there's any other questions on the budget. And
Okay.
so, Councilmember Mock.
So I think it's baby shoes, folks. The attorneys need baby shoes for their kids. That's exactly what it is. I've been on the roundtable and I've been on City Association since I was elected 6 months ago. And one of the first questions that I asked of Cities Association was, what do they do for all the cities in the area? And then I was given an appropriate answer. And now it comes to this, where we have a number of attorneys for the roundtable, attorneys for Cities Association. We have hostile work environments. It's just very difficult to operate in such an environment where the costs have truly exploded, absolutely and totally exploded. So I don't know whether or not we should have the roundtable pay for these costs in the first place, because I'm not so sure that the roundtable is responsible for a hostile work environment investigation, or their attorneys that are being represented or represent the roundtable. I really don't know that they should pay the roundtable, that is. I also think that we should get back to what the Cities Association certainly wants to do for itself, and that's to help people. And it really is not doing that at this point in time. I seriously doubt that if we continue in this manner, we will be more than broke, and we'll have to ask for extraordinary fees from each one of our associate members, which almost means the dissolution of Cities Association. And that's something that I'm not in favor of.
Just, and I appreciate all the comments right now. I just want to make sure we understand I'm taking questions, because we still want to make sure we allow our public to speak, and then we'll come back to commentary. And so, Councilmember Montano.
Thank you, Mariko. So the bottom line is we are the fiscal agent for the roundtable. And by law, if there's a complaint of a hostile work environment, we have to legally investigate it. That means we have to hire lawyers. It's not like we don't have a choice. We have to. These costs, these legal costs are ongoing, and I think they're going to run us dry because, lawyers are expensive. And it doesn't stand. There was a question that I saw in the chat room. Well, I guess they were asking, was it the Cities Association? No, it's the roundtable. That's where it stems from. That's where the complaint stems from. So I consider us being the fiscal agent of the roundtable. It's a liability because this is the first time that I know of, or maybe it's happened before. I'm not sure. And what if it happens again? I personally would like the Cities Association to separate ourselves from the roundtable because it is a liability. So those are my thoughts. We in our bylaws we have to have 6 to 7 months reserves, and when you showed us the budget, that's not going to happen. They need to pay up because it stems from their organization, and we have a fiscal. We are the fiscal agent. We have an MOU. We have to find legal recourse to investigate. We don't have a choice. So that's why I would like to separate ourselves from the roundtable. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, and again, we're taking questions right now because I do want to make sure we go to our public for public comment. So I see Councilmember Phil Seth. Do you have a question?
I do.
Yes.
So what would happen if we said, you know what, we're going to pay the existing legal bills and not incur any more legal expenses? Done. We'll stop all activity other than is legally mandated, right? And we said, we just don't want to spend any more money on legal expenses, even at the cost of not recovering stuff from the roundtable. Is that actually possible? What's the minimum possible for us to spend on this issue starting now?
I'll take a stab at that, and then I'm going to look to our treasurer and our director. At a minimum, to complete the investigation, it will be no more than 6,000.
So if we said, you know what, we don't want to, we'll spend the 6,000 because we're legally obliged to, but we don't want to spend any more money than that. Is that actually possible? And what would that look like?
It is legal, and I'm going to look to our legal counsel. I believe it's legally possible, and that's the decision that we would make as a board of directors. So, but I don't want, I'm going to ask our legal counsel since it was very specific.
We're required to bring the investigation to a close, and then we'll have to determine what we're going to do with it. And that's going to involve some costs. Kramer investigation is going to have some costs. I'm trying to spend virtually nothing, and I've been instructed to do that moving forward. And then we have the firm that's monitoring Kramer that we had to have that intermediary there. I mean, I've given out the direction and to all involved to keep it as lean as they possibly can. And I don't know what to say beyond that. It's going to cost something. It's probably more than the 6,000 because we have to pay for Kramer investigations as well. But it's probably, I do see this ending at the end of September. I don't feel that's unrealistic. Can I promise? No, I can't promise anything. I don't have a crystal ball.
But we can, but once the investigation is complete, we can.
We're done. We're done.
We can
We're
stop
done.
all further costs. Correct.
Right. We're done at that point. Yes.
Okay. And Mayor Zhao?
Thank you.
Actually, I do want to point one thing out. If you were to give the instruction today, and it's in your purview to do whatever you wish as board, to say stop everything today, I do think that the board, that the Cities Association, as well as the roundtable, would incur a much larger amount of liability because we didn't do what we're required to do, which is to fully investigate what's occurred. And we all need to realize that this is just like a private company or any other city. While it normally maybe would be handled by an HR department, we don't have that. That in serious allegations, you're required to do investigations, and it's painful, it's expensive, and it's difficult to control. But this has unfortunately happened to all of our cities at one point or another. I've been around a long time, and this is what happens, but we're trying to control it as much as we can.
Got it. Thank you. That's very helpful.
And Mayor Zhao, do you have a question as well?
Yeah, just one last question. Can we set a cap how much we are willing to spend? I know normally we put a budget right now, we say 6,000, but legal counsel, Baum just say, there's no crystal ball, we don't know. And, there's more cost, with other two legal firms. I mean, I just want to have a kind of roughly idea. I mean, yes, if it's 6,000, we put like what, the 20% more, it's okay. But I don't want this to be something unknown, right? We don't know how much it's gonna, I know no one has a crystal ball, but at least I want to put a cap there. Let's say 20% more than what we, budget for, that's it. And anything more, we have to get the board's approval before we authorize again, before they start doing more work. We got to look at this, realistically. I don't want, right now, down to 1 months or 2 months. And we got to be more, I don't know. I just think we need to be more responsible for our financial situation. This is, if we don't put a cap there, this expenses continue to explode, exploding. So this is something I worry about.
And Mayor Zhao, the current contract with the third-party investigator with Ren, we did put a maximum of no more than 6,000. That was the estimate to complete. Through Gary, we have instructed Kramer, the investigator, to complete the investigation to complete it as best as she can with where we are now, understanding that we don't want to expend any further funds. I do feel Gary has been carrying that message quite strongly to our vendors. So, any further question?
Thank you.
Okay, and so again, I want to make sure like we go through the presentation, ask questions, and then go back and allow our public to speak to it. But Treasurer, Mayor Fleiker?
President Saik, I just wanted to flag the total amount just in response to Eric and Jan's question. As the executive director showed on the slide to date, the amount is a little more than 33,000, I think. And there's still bills coming in, and then the 6,000 that you just mentioned. I want to just make sure that everybody has a full understanding of the total bill that we're looking at.
Okay.
So that's a total of 39,000 because it's the contract was approved at 6,000.
Okay, and then do we have any other slides, Andy, or are we at the update as Mayor Constantine had requested?
You're at the update.
Okay, and so I'm going to turn to Vice Mayor Jones and to Mayor Klein to give an update on the discussion that has taken place with the roundtable. Since our last closed session, we did convey the request to pay the bills. And so if you wouldn't mind just sharing some information.
Thank you, Mariko. First of all, this is going to be a verbal report, and we will follow up with a written report with all the supporting documentation by the next Cities Association meeting. So back in January 2021, the board took action to form this ad hoc committee. And the purpose was to work with the roundtable to identify ways to mitigate issues raised by the board that were included in previous letters and a report back to the board within 3 months with our findings. There was a request for reimbursement of the Cities Association's costs beginning in January 1, 2021 that were incurred by and because of the roundtable during that fiscal, as the Cities Association being the fiscal sponsor. And the ad hoc committee was to develop a payment schedule and a plan between both bodies. We met on January 29th, 2021, and then we had a pause because of all the legal issues that have been discussed. And then we resumed on June 11th. And then we had a meeting on June 21st, July 2nd, and August 9th. Members of the committee, the ad hoc committee, are myself and Larry Klein, Mary Lynn Bernald, Glenn Hendricks, and Kathy Watanabe. Once the meetings and the deliberations resumed, the ad hoc committees attempted to mitigate and address several of the issues that were noted by the Cities Association Board. And the ad hoc committee created a matrix that will provide that matrix with to you in the next meeting to really work through the issues that were identified. And we made some pretty significant progress. Issues around governance and Brown Act issues, fiscal responsibility and operations, personnel time management, legal and HR issues, and also an exit strategy. We discussed having an alternative or another fiscal sponsor or agent support the roundtable. And Glenn Hendricks will go into more detail on other alternatives and their efforts to find someone else to take over that responsibility. There was a consensus among the committees that we should continue to have a conversation and discussion and how we can mitigate the issues. And the issues that were identified that we're going to work on, or that we are working on, were Cities Association fiscal sponsorship agreement that includes a schedule of fees and agreement of services, revised MOU and bylaws, rules of engagement, guiding principles, code of conduct, program coordinator to support the roundtable, and also a termination clause. So regarding the payment for staff time and legal costs that were incurred supporting the roundtable beginning from January 1st, 2021, the roundtable ad hoc committee expressed a reluctance to the request that the roundtable members provide a payment. And they cited an absence of an agreement, oversight to monitor, approve, and pay such cost. At the same time, the Cities Association staff cited such costs and time that would not be expended if the roundtable were not in operation and relying on the Cities Association for support. That would be managing contracts and working with the roundtable consultant, attorneys, and obviously the investigation. So here's where we are now. So we had a discussion with the Roundtable Ad Hoc Committee about trying to identify other fiscal sponsors. So I'm gonna pass it over to Glenn Hendricks, who's gonna go into more detail in terms of their efforts to find another entity to work with. So Glenn, if you are available, if you could speak to that, please.
How much, Vice Mayor Jones, how much time would you like us to give to Mr. Hendricks? How much time is your presentation?
I don't.
It should be pretty quick. 5 minutes.
Okay.
I think it'll be less than that.
Yeah.
So hello, everyone. My name is Glenn Hendricks. I'm the vice mayor of Sunnyvale, and I'm a member of the roundtable. And Mary Lynn asked me to attend here today because she is not able to. I came prepared to answer any questions. I don't have a specific presentation to present to you. I will say, as it relates to the roundtable and trying to take a look at being able to find a different fiscal agent, I believe it was back in the January timeframe when we, the Cities Association agreed to have the roundtables operate. We had gone through and discussed that we had looked at other different entities to be the roundtable's fiscal agent, and that because of cost concerns of what it was going to be and whether or not it was actually meeting the objectives of what we were trying to do, that having the roundtable stay under the Cities Association was the preferred option. And that's why we had gone ahead and created the ad hoc committee between the roundtable and the cities association to try and work through all these issues. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Glenn. Just so the board knows that the roundtable looked at Santa Clara County, a roundtable member jurisdiction like the city of Mountain View, joint venture Silicon Valley, the SFO roundtable, forming a JPA, forming a 501c3 or a 501c6. So those are some of the options that they explored, and their report back to us and their feedback to us was that all of those options were not viable.
They were not preferred, and they probably wouldn't work. And I believe you'd said you're going to be providing some written material back to the whole Cities Association, and that the answer to all those questions is in the written documentation that we've been going back and forth with between in the ad hoc committee. So I think that'll be part of the material that you'll be sharing with the rest of the Cities Association.
Great, thank you, Glenn. So next steps to consider, consider the executive board's recommendation of August 6th, 2021 and invoice member cities of the roundtable for the outstanding dollar amount of staff and legal fees to allow for a clean slate. The board to determine if the relationship between the Cities Association and roundtable should continue. Direct councils of both bodies to draft and propose the recommended documents and agreements that would ensure resolution and successful business of both bodies moving forward. Roundtable to approve a budget for fiscal year 21-22. Cities Association to bill roundtable members for fiscal 21-22 dues based on new and proposed agreements and proposed or approved budget. And then finally, review of other options under which roundtable could operate and continue business. And again, that's partially what we went over and Glenn went over as well. So that's my report. And again, a more formal report with attached documentation will be coming out shortly.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And Vice Mayor Chow, do you have a question of Mr. Hendricks?
I have a question regarding the Cities Association staff, whether it's hourly or like a certain number of hours per week.
Okay, why don't we hold that question for when we come back? I'm taking questions right now, Mr. Hendricks.
Okay.
And
I
remember,
have a question for Hendricks.
okay, go ahead.
So when the subcommittee decided to I know there were no other options, and then decided to continue the relationship with Cities Association. I'm grateful for that. Was there an understanding that roundtable will have to incur at least staffing cost? And so was there an estimation of that, or what kind of cost is there?
So I think what you're asking is, did when we embarked on working to see if the roundtable was going to be able to stay under the Cities Association, because that's the effort that we started embarked in January, and we had placed a time frame to get that done, but that had some other issues. I think we've gone and dealt with that. I did make the statement in I think that January Cities Association meeting that the roundtable had every expectation that it would need to go ahead and pay certain monies to the Cities Association to pay for the work that they were providing. Now, there was an assumption we were going to go ahead and create, a term sheet and define what those kind of payments would be and what costs would be and all those kind of things like that. But as Chappie explained, we started to have that discussion. We stopped. We've only recently been able to restart, and we're in all these different things. So I think there was an expectation by the roundtable that they were going to pay certain fees to the Cities Association. But I think there was also an expectation that those would be jointly agreed to before we engaged in those. And for a whole variety of reasons that we've had to go through. That didn't transpire, but I don't know that that alleviates the acknowledgement that if the city's association is providing a service to the roundtable should pay an appropriate fee for that. But we never worked out all the agreements and put it all in writing yet.
Thank you.
And Councilmember Abikoga?
Thank you. My question is on a similar line. So when you looked at alternatives, you mentioned there were, I think, I just wanted to clarify, you said that some were not viable, and I think you said some were not preferred. When you talk about viability, did that have to do with the fiscal responsibility or the fiscal ramifications of going with an alternative? And was that compared to the current situation where, the city association was incurring costs on behalf of the roundtables, I'll just say, for example, staff time, or did you include those types of costs when you were basically shopping and comparing the different alternatives?
We did not compare those to here we're getting the city's association services for free. The assumption was here where there was going to be a cost to do that, because if you went to any organization and said, here, anybody was going to go ahead and charge. And I think this is what we're dealing with now, is just a byproduct of this. We should have addressed this way back at the beginning when we originally created the agreement, right? I mean, that's the challenge we're dealing with.
Right.
And so, as I said in that January meeting, of course, whatever is agreed upon is that the service that's being provided, and we should define a cost for those things. Whether or not it's a one-time cost or it's a per hourly cost, and we think there will be make an estimate for however many and stuff like that. The assumption was that we were going to go ahead and do that. I don't think the roundtable anticipated that here we should get, quote, freebies, right? But let's figure out what those costs are, and then agree to them. And I think just one of the challenges we're running into right here is like with the legal fees. It's unfortunate that just at the time we did the contract with whichever one of the entities, we should have gone. The city association said, here, you need to put that into your budget now, as opposed to after the fact. And I'll just go ahead. I tried, if you allow me, I believe it is appropriate for the motion that, I think the president was trying to get to is, yes, you should send all those invoices to us. Now, what the roundtable is going to do with them, I don't know, but that's the one step that hasn't happened. These agreements have been created, and costs are being done. And yes, if you want the roundtable to pay for them, yes, let's go through the step of sending it to the roundtable so that decision can be, they can vote whatever they're going to do, right? But I think that's an appropriate thing to be done, because that's the step that has been missed prior.
Right. So since I guess January, and going back to the costs that we've incurred, the 39,000, some of those were for staff time, not for legal fees. So were those agreed upon? Has the roundtable agreed to pay for at least the staff time costs?
I think we had conceptually agreed to, I made the statement in January. Here, yes, we should pay for those things.
Okay.
But because of the sequence of what happened, as we said, the ad hoc committees were going to meet, and then they were stopped by the cities association. We never had an opportunity to go through and work out, kind of the term sheet of, what is that going to be? So what are the services we're going to get, and what are they going to be the costs?
Sure.
So without doing that, now the roundtable's getting a bill that says, here, you must pay that without having worked it out in advance. I think there were some questions about here, what they were, and I think, Chappie and the chair of the roundtable were going through that. And you guys are now saying here, no, you just want to go ahead and forward that whole thing to us, which I think is an appropriate thing to do. And we'll go ahead and the roundtable will take whatever action it takes with that. But it's a missing step. We need to get those invoices in front of the roundtable, so it's going to do whatever it's going to do. I totally support that step.
My understanding was that, every month the cities association, we approve our financials, and part of that is the invoices we get from ESA, and then I guess I thought that whatever other expenses we incur on behalf of the roundtable are getting sent to the roundtable. So is that not the case? Or
I think you have to remember is the roundtable didn't meet until May, I think. And I wasn't able to attend that meeting because of the horrible thing that happened at VTA that day.
Right.
But I think up to that point, there had never been an agendized item of all of those invoices. And we can say, why that did or didn't happen. I don't really, at this point, I don't think it matters. But, and that's why I say, I think it's very appropriate for you to go ahead and forward those, so those can be an agendized item, and then the roundtable, do what I can't speak for everybody else of what goes on. I do think there were some questions about some of the staff things, what the items were and how much they were. But at this point, I think they just need to be gone ahead and move forward as they are. That's would be my thought.
I agree with you. It was this, at the last board meeting, we had a bill on our consent calendar, and it was the roundtable chair who asked us to take that off and table it and send it to the ad hoc committee. So I just want to be clear in terms of where these bills are, kind of at.
And I think the discussion was, and maybe Chappie can clarify that, the heads of the two ad hoc committees were trying to work through and go here, let them take a pass at here. Is this really the right line item or not, and have that discussion. But yeah, ultimately, one way or the other, it needs to get in front of the roundtable, because the roundtable has not looked at it from a budgetary. This is, I never thought about it that the roundtable is going to be charged to pay for the investigation, which I have no problem with the investigation being done. We should investigate, legitimate claims. That we were going to have to pay for that, but we missed a step collectively, that when those contracts were created, we should have immediately had those onto the roundtables things, if that was the intent of what was going to occur.
Okay, and then I have one more question going back to the alternatives in terms of, were there some that were viable and some not preferred, or were they all not viable? Meaning, did example, maybe you went and asked SFO if they would sponsor you and they said no, versus some other entity saying yes, but the roundtable didn't want to go with that entity.
Yeah. So, for example, SFO, they said no. I forget the name. What Russell Hancock, they're his organization. They said, oh, sure, yeah, we do it. You can pay us a bunch of money, and then they wanted to take the roundtable off in a different direction. Okay, that was not meeting the objectives of what it was. Okay. And then other ones were just they were not practical, or we felt that they were going to be more expensive, even if and when the roundtable was paying an appropriate fee for cities associations services.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Mock.
One question, Glenn, and that is source of funds in the cash flow statement. Where does the roundtable get its money, and how many sources are there for that money?
Well, the roundtable, through the Cities Association, invoiced a fee to the members of the roundtable. So that's how we got our original fees. And originally there were more cities in the roundtable, but due to the pandemic and budget issues for different components or cities, at the time when that all happened, 14 months ago, several cities did step out of the roundtable. So it's right now the source of funds is dues that go to the roundtable via the Cities Association from the cities, and it was the list of cities currently that are left that was originally shown earlier in the meeting.
And that's
Nancy,
all.
I see your hand raised. You want to add on to that?
Yeah, can I just provide a little clarification to that as well? So the Cities Association created the roundtable. The Cities Association has a due structure for the Cities Association, and that is we have tiered prices for the size of, or tier membership dues for the size of the city that you are. The roundtable is based on a population and a formula, and that formula was agreed to by every city and the county, and it is in the MOU and in the bylaws. And also, just to let you know that our membership dues the Cities Association membership dues raise $150,000 a year. The current roundtable membership with 9 members, including the county, raises $187,000 a year.
And then Councilmember Montano, do you have a question of Glenn?
I want to follow up on Andy's remarks. How much is in their budget right now? The roundtable.
That's in your packet. So they paused their meetings and so they didn't have as many meetings, and then they extended. They requested that the Cities Association extend the contract for their consultant. So their contract for their consultant, instead of ending in June, now ends in December. But they still, the roundtable did not bring forth a budget at their meeting, at either their special meeting or their regular meeting. So they haven't passed the budget. So their members can't be invoiced yet, because there is, nothing to invoice them because they haven't decided what their dues are.
So, and then Andy, if we could hold that up, if there's more on that, let's bring that. I want to make sure we ask Glenn all our questions, because we also have Roland waiting, and I want to make sure we get through that as well. But definitely, Carmen, I'll go back to you. Do you have any questions of Glenn?
Yeah, I just had, so I'm a little bit confused. So Glenn, you said that we should start over when we get invoices, but then you said that you had invoices, so I'm a little bit confused. So does the roundtable have invoices?
The roundtable itself as an agenda item has not had any of these items go to it, because it is my understanding that the 2 leaders of the ad hoc committee of both the roundtable and the Cities Association were going through a process of where they were looking at, because there were some questions about those invoices, and that they were going to try and resolve those questions before that was placed in front of the city's roundtable board to take a vote on.
Yes, but they did see it, they just didn't take any action. Okay.
The roundtable itself has not seen them, because the chair of the roundtable and the chair of your ad hoc committee were going through a process to try and resolve the questions that the chair had about those before they went to the roundtable. So they've not been on the roundtable's agenda. And I'm highly supportive of doing it that, though.
All right, thank you.
And that's an accurate description, Glenn, of the process.
All right, thank you.
And then our next question, Mayor Fleiker.
Thank you, and thanks, Glenn. I'm happy to hear that you're supportive of the executive board's recommendation that we send the bill to the roundtable. My question has to do with the viability and the future relationship between the roundtable and the Cities Association. Because if I heard you correctly, even if we were to send the invoices to the roundtable has its own board, and so that board would then vote on whether or not it will have its member cities pay the bills. And as a member of the Cities Association, that concerns me. If we were to support moving forward as the fiscal agent for the roundtable, if something like this, hopefully not, but if something like this were to happen again, where we would have the roundtable being able to say, well, we have our own separate board and we're going to vote against something the Cities Association is recommending. And so could you speak to that, Glenn? Because that concerns me as I consider whether or not I support continuing with our relationship. the fact that the roundtable can object to something the Citizens Association, and this is a great example, and if that's the future structure, that really concerns me.
Well, so I understand your concern, and I've been trying to be very careful about the words I use because I can't speak for the rest of the board. Just like, any of you can't speak for the roundtable and how a vote would go ahead and take place. I think the challenge that we have right here is the timing and the way these invoices were generated. I think, let's just say there's the two buckets. There's the staff time and there's the contract time for the legal fees. And I think the contract time for the legal fees is easier. I think this would have all been much simpler and handled better if at the time the Cities Association initiated into the contractual agreement with the legal parties, if an estimate had been made of how much that's going to be, and that was given to the roundtable to say, here, we think we need to embark in a legal contract. We think it's going to be $50,000, and you need to go ahead and put that in your budget so that we can go ahead as we move forward with the contract. We have an identified source of funds for how it will be paid for. And that those kind of things, that would just be an additional thing to make sure we put into the MOU for how we're all going to operate. Because if we had operated that way, then I don't think there would be any question about paying those legal fee bills. On the staff time, it's the same thing. I think the assumption was we were trying to, within 60 days from January, be able to work through all the MOU questions and set up the term sheet for how staff fees were going to be charged, and that all that was going to be done before very many invoices of those things were created. And that would have gone ahead and created the baseline that said, here's how we're going to go ahead and pay for these services that are being provided. So I think we're just in an unusual circumstance right now that we weren't able to get either of those things to happen up front. And so now we're trying to have to go backwards in time to create the clearly identified source of funds for the agreed upon pieces of work. Does that make sense what I said?
I want to quickly touch on what you said about the process. So are you saying that had we presented when we were first discussing the investigation and legal bills, if we had presented that to the roundtable would have accepted those, there would not be a vote necessary by the roundtable, because that's the part I'm concerned about moving forward, where the roundtable has its own board, its own budget, could veto such a recommendation from the Citizens Association when the bills relate to the roundtable. And the second thing I wanted to clarify, Glenn, because I thought I heard differently, is it correct that the roundtable still has not done its budget for this year and therefore has not invoiced its member cities? Because if that is the case, then it sounds like we can do exactly what you're saying. Send the bills to the roundtable, incorporates it into the budget, and then invoices the member cities.
So I think I'll take the second part of the question first. I think conceptually, yes. And I think that's the reason we didn't do the budget in the last meeting, because of the clarity around what those charges were going to go ahead and be. As far as the first part, I really have kind of two comments. The first is, if the Cities Association said, here, we're going to embark on this $50,000 hypothetical contract, you need to approve. If we had said, if we said yes, everything's great. If we'd said no and identified the line item in the budget, if we'd said no, then there would have been clarity of the way you guys would have been going forward on what it would mean for embarking on a contract that didn't have identified sources. I do think we could probably put language into the MOU to try and help clarify things, but a little bit about what you're getting into is an organization, Cities Association, being able to say to the roundtable, here, you must do this. I mean, that would be kind of like, if the cities or some other entity had something in place that was able to come to the Cities Association and say, you must do something regardless of what your board says, right? So I do think we could take a look at language there, but that's the dichotomy I think that comes with anything. But the better part is if we did this in the sequential steps we were talking about, all of it would have been known up front before before the cities association embarked on a contract with an unknown funding source. I probably didn't give you the answer exactly what you wanted to hear, which is, oh yeah, sure, we'll do whatever you want. But that's the way it works, right?
Last thing, President, just within the context, just to clarify, it's not anything that we directed to do, you must do, but specific if they're legal bills related to the roundtable. That to me, as a structure, I would want us to be able to say as the fiscal agent, roundtable, these are your bills.
And I think that could be included in the language of the MOU, because I've sat with Chappie and Larry about this a lot. Obviously, if we have the agreement of what the MOU says, if then here you say, here, we really need you to do this legal bill thing, and you don't want to pay for it, the obvious answer is, okay, well then we're done and we don't want to be your.
The terms of the MOU are really not on the agenda tonight, so we should just concentrate on the concepts here of
and I was trying to
what's on the agenda.
The concept of how it would work in answer to her question.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a mechanism that could be done.
Mayor Flegger, do you have any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Baum, for keeping us on track of what the agenda is and Brown Act rules. So, Vice Mayor Chow?
Hi. So the question for Glenn and I guess Chappie too. So the subcommittee, the joint subcommittee, you said you were working through the bills to come to an agreement on each of the items expensed to the roundtable on whether they make sense or not. So have you finished that process? It doesn't sound like you finished it.
Chappie can chime in. I believe that it is now finished because the executive board of the Cities Association has said, submit them as they are. So yes, I believe that work is now done by the fact of what the executive board made a decision.
Thank you, Glenn.
Do you agree with those items that's listed as staffing cost?
So I'm not gonna answer that right now. It doesn't matter if I agree or disagree. I do agree with the recommendation to put them in front of the roundtable board.
Thank you,
Sounds
Glenn.
like you might have disagree with some items. Okay.
So to add a little bit more context.
And this is really a time to ask questions of Mr. Hendricks. We're not going to get into a debate. Vice Mayor Jones?
Yeah, just a little context thing. Glenn is correct that there's really two tracks that we're on right now. One was the track that I was on working with Mary Lynn to identify all the line items on the invoice that she agreed with, identify the ones that she had questions on, and then identify the ones that she was disputing, and then get more information on those items so that we could work through them. At the same time, the executive board made a decision based on the financial stability and issues at the Cities Association to go a separate track in terms of asking the roundtable to pay all outstanding invoices. So there were two tracks going on, and part of the discussion and decision-making that needs to take place now is which track do we want to go on moving forward.
So you are saying there were some disputed items, but they were not resolved.
And Vice Mayor Jones, I think we need to, I still have another member of the public. So okay. I think the issue right now is if there are any questions of Mr. Hendricks. So, and Mayor Constantine.
Thank you, Chair. Glenn, when the ad hoc committee was formed, were you or was the roundtable under the impression that the ad hoc committee was formed to save the relationship with the city association and the roundtable?
I don't know that I would use the word save, but it was.
But let me cut you off, because the reason why I used the word save was because the executive board had already voted to separate from the roundtable, which is why the roundtable had to go and start looking for other fiduciary entities. So that's why I use the word save.
Okay. Well, I believe what, somebody can read the minutes that the ad hoc committees were formed to be able to try and find a way to address all the concerns that the cities association had with the roundtable being able to be underneath it. and to find a way to document that so we could have a written agreement about all that. And we could have a long discussion about, I think, the lack of some clarity of roles and responsibilities is what created some of the issues that happened in the past. And so it was to try and define all that and to also work through this whole invoicing piece.
I'm sorry, Glenn, I don't mean to cut you off, but I understand what the ad hoc committee was charged to do. I'm just trying to figure out what the understanding from the roundtable was, because the executive board had taken a vote to separate ourselves, and I lost Glenn. I can't see his face right now, but the vote. Thanks. Now where'd he go? He's not on this page. Anyway, there you are, Glenn. Thank you for waving. Okay. So I'm just trying to figure out what the expectations of the roundtable is, because the executive board had voted to separate. So I'm just trying to understand where we are as far as trying to figure out how we're going to pay the bills. And I have questions on that as well. And continue, because if you know that you're about to be evicted, use that analogy, then you're either going to clean up the place so you get your deposit back, or you're just going to leave it as is. So was the roundtable preparing to settle their bills with the understanding that they were going to find a fiscal agent, or were they just going to say, we're going to fix what's broken between the two entities and continue the relationship? I'm just trying to figure out what the thought process is, not what the process was, but what the thought process was.
The thought process that my understanding, and I thought there had been an incremental vote that said, yes, the ad hocs were there to try and find a way to move forward. And if that means, to save the relationship.
Okay. I get it. Okay. So,
I wasn't looking to get evicted and trash the apartment.
I get that. So when were prior bills paid by the roundtable to the city association for services rendered, not legally, but for staff costs and things like that?
I think if I remember the conversation in that at the cities association, there was an agreement that we were not going to go backwards from January 1, 2021. So we're going to go January 1st, 21 forward. And that as part of what the roundtable was willing to pay appropriate fees for staff time and all that. And that the ad hoc committee was going to figure that out, essentially come up with kind of a rate sheet for what the different services might be and how that would be done. And I think the thought was, we were all going to try and get that done within 60 days. So we wouldn't be here in August going, here, let's talk about fees from the last several months when we hadn't worked out that term sheet.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. That's all the questions I have for this witness.
And Councilmember Abikoga.
So, we have to go back and look at the minutes, but my recollection from the January meeting was that we voted to allow the ad hoc committee to work with the roundtable for 3 months to see if all of the issues that we have could be resolved in a mutually agreeable way. And then that would be brought back to this board for a decision as to whether we continue to be the fiscal agent or not. And the challenge there is that, because of COVID, I understand there were some time lapses. But based on the meeting schedule that you presented, and I can't remember who mentioned, I think it was Chappie, we are actually around 2.5 months, give or take a couple of weeks. So we're at this point in time where we need, I think we need to have some kind of recommendation from the ad hoc or just a report out as to whether you think or you've been able to work out the issues or not. And so that's my question to the ad hoc, to Larry and Chappie, is where are you on that? And will you be able to give us a report out? Is that what you're doing today? Or are you planning to do that at our next meeting? Or what is the schedule moving forward?
And if I could, I'm trying to keep us on track, guys, so that we leave at a somewhat reasonable time. I can, Councilmember Abikoga, as if I'm jotting down questions. If I can, ask Vice Mayor Jones and Mayor Klein to answer that once we close, because I still have one member of the public that would like to speak.
Fine.
So is that okay, council member?
That's fine.
Do you have any questions of Mr. Hendricks?
No, my questions are for Larry and Shelby.
Okay, so does anyone else have any questions of Glenn? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Glenn.
If I could just give you a 15-second answer to that question from the
15
roundtable's perspective, I think we were working through all the issues, and it was just a matter of documenting those resolutions as opposed to having any other issues to be resolved. Thanks. I'll be around if you have more questions.
And so our next speaker, Mr. LeBron, thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and you will be glad to learn that Mr. Jones and Mr. Hendricks taught me how to get my point across in 1 minute or less. I have no comments or questions about the report from the other committee, but I did have a couple of quick comments and one question to the chair about item 2A, which was to do with the state of the budget. First of all, I do appreciate the transparency surrounding the financial situation of the association. But having said that, I do believe that any discussion of the specifics of the investigation should take place in closed session, not in public. The question to the chair is whether the city's association right now is incorporated as a 501c4 or something else. And one final comment with regards to having an accurate record of what was said, if it was possible in the budget to allow for closed captioning, which then in turn automatically archives the transcript of the entire meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask our director to answer that when we go back into comment, since I don't necessarily have the answers to those questions. And so real quick, any questions of Mr. LeBron? Okay, seeing
no
none.
question.
And I'd like to see, are there any other participants that would like to speak tonight? Okay, I see no hands raised, so I'm going to close public testimony. I'm going to come back to our council, to our colleagues. Director Jordan, can you answer our legal status?
We are an unincorporated association right now, and we are forming a JPA.
Okay, and so now, real quick, there were several questions asked. I want to go back to Councilmember Abikoga's question, to Vice Mayor Jones and to Mayor Klein on, is this the ad hoc report and recommendation, or will that occur at a later time?
No, this was just a verbal update of our progress, and that we will be issuing a formal report with all the supporting documentation. And we're on the timeline of having that done within the 3-month or close to the 3-month time that was set out.
Councilmember Abikoga, any further questions?
So can we expect that before our next meeting in September and just have the discussion at our September board meeting?
I will work my hardest to get it done at least one day before the 3-month due date expires, and submit that to the executive board.
Okay.
But yes, Margaret, that is the goal, to get out that report, and we were hoping to have it sooner rather than later, but to work out all the issues and also kind of lay out the matrix of issues that we went through from an ad hoc standpoint and a very clear standpoint of in discussions between the different members on those resolutions. So yes, that should be well defined before our next meeting.
Okay.
Just a caveat, Margaret, it might come to you at 11:59.
That's fine.
All right.
I won't be that tough on the time, but the key here is, right, obviously our city association financial situation is kind of driving the timeline at this point. So I feel very strongly that we need to have the report out and, your recommendations. I will say right now, resolving this issue of who pays the bills is a big piece to all of this as to whether we can move forward or not. So if that's not resolved, then I would not feel comfortable moving forward with continuing as a fiscal agent. Thanks.
Thank you. And that's a great segue because there is a motion that the executive board has made. But before we go, I'm going to ask Andy to put that motion so it's absolutely crystal clear. But Treasurer Fliger.
Thanks, Mayor Sayak. I just wanted to quickly add the ad hoc committee is coming back to us with their presentation, and I want to make sure that as part of that presentation, it includes any potential terms with the roundtable, because for me, as I mentioned earlier, for me to make a decision on whether or not I could support continuing as the fiscal agent, I would need to better understand what that relationship looks like and the risk that it could be exposing the Cities Association to.
Okay, and Mayor Zhao?
Yes, I know ad hoc committee is going to give us a final report and a recommendation. So shall we wait for their recommendation before we actually vote on the motion, currently displayed, on the screen? So I actually want to hear what's our ad hoc committee's recommendation. Is this what, because they say they have not come, with the final report yet, right?
And I want to clarify, Vice Mayor Jones, that final report is not specific to the motion at hand of recouping our costs now, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So
there will be, as far as the MOU in process, there will be, part of it will be talking about, capturing costs that are incurred by the roundtable, and that was the process of invoice approval, and those kind of operational details will be part of our report, but not specifically this motion.
Got it. Thank you.
Any further questions, Mayor Zhao?
No, thank you.
Okay, and Vice Mayor Chow?
Yeah, could I ask the question about the staffing for Cities Association?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, you did ask. They are salaried. Oh.
They hourly, or how are they salaried?
Actually, Director Jordan, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I'm salaried, and the admin time is hourly.
Okay, and
So
Mayor.
Full time, right?
Correct.
And then the items expensed to the roundtable, are they performed by the hourly staffing or performed by the salaried employee?
It's all done hourly.
So they are performed.
I track my time, and only my time has been charged, and then attorney time as well. And I track my time in intervals similar to what Gary does or what the attorneys do. Also, to let you know that it does take a lot of time to do that. It's not really what you want your executive director to have to do, is to track their time and everything they do.
Yeah, definitely. I think staffing costs should be paid, but I'm trying to understand. So suppose roundtable doesn't exist, the cost for a salaried employee of Cities Association is fixed, right?
That is correct. And so one of the considerations is for Andy's time, what she doesn't spend on roundtable, she could spend on Cities Association.
So Cities Association had incurred extra costs that some other hourly employee have to spend because Andy has to spend time on roundtable?
No, Andy does not get to, Andy's not working on our priorities because she's spending time on roundtable.
So
So like an example is, instead of talking about racial justice this meeting, we're talking about roundtable. So it's just a matter of we each have a certain amount of time, and it's how we're spending that time at this time.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand. So there is not really a hard cost for the cities association because cities association's fixed cost is the same. It's just some work of cities association probably didn't get done because of roundtable issues.
For an example, tonight we're not having a legislative committee meeting because I've been spending my time on the roundtable. So as Chair Sayak, President Sayak said, there's only so much time, and so you can, you have to choose, what to work on.
I know, but then we're over budget, so I'm trying to understand.
We're over budget because of the legal fees.
Legal.
Over budget is not because of staffing costs, it's because of the legal fees.
Yes.
Okay. And so, okay. So I think emotionally, the roundtable should cover the cost that's incurred by the roundtable. But legally, as a member of any board, my responsibility is I cannot blindly approve anything that the board didn't approve and then say whatever you spend on, we will pay for it. That's just not responsible as a board member. So emotionally, I think, roundtable should cover the cost, but the process needs to be followed. And there has been a pretty messy process. And then I think I do want to see the items that were, I guess, disputed, because we see that $3,600 staffing time were charged from January to April when the roundtable didn't have any meeting. So I'm curious. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Mock?
I see that the Cities Association has essentially two sources of income. One from the cities who are members of the roundtable, and one from cities who are not members of the roundtable. So I think that the council member from Cupertino is correct. The responsibility for the billings should be separate. There are two separate boards. And I don't really think that the general liability of the cities association should be part of the liabilities of the separate board and the SCSC. So, however, I also believe that we should have a fiscal agent at SCSC, and that should be Cities Association. So in the gist of everything that I'm saying here, there should be increased fees for the cities that are part of the SCSC, and I am representing one of the cities for those costs that they incur themselves. And I also think that the general funds that everybody pays for should be increased, and some recruitment should be done to get more cities on board. Because if you're down to like 1 month worth of reserves, basically, is it like, can you pay the bills? Can you pay payroll? And the answer is almost no. So you're almost to that point where you really have to do something. And I would encourage that, at least for this time, I would make an exception for the SCSC to pay some of the bills, just to keep the Cities Association going at this point. So that would be it.
Okay, and so I hear lots of comments on a potential motion. Would anyone like to make the motion? And again, we have the recommended motion that the executive board has provided. Andy, if you can put that on the screen. Would anyone like to make this motion?
So I'll make the motion. This is Vice Mayor Montano, make that motion, recommend the motion.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. We have a motion as stated on the screen by Vice Mayor Montano of Milpitas. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, and that's from Mayor Fliger of Los Altos. I'm opening it up for comments. Okay, I see no hands raised for comments. And so let's call the question. Yes, Mayor Klein, you have a question?
Just very quickly, and I think it's important to say, ultimately that the roundtable supports, whether or not they support everything, but supports sending these invoices to the roundtable, and definitely it hasn't come in front of them as far as approving those invoices. But I do think, they are in agreement with at least some of them, and I think that the invoices themselves and the payment of those invoices puts the cities association in better financial stead, and then we'll deal with other issues later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Vice Mayor Chow?
I am not comfortable with the language that's proposed there, because it says the roundtable should pay all the fees. I think the Glenn's recommendation earlier was that the invoices should be sent to the roundtable.
They've already been sent.
And so so comments are being made, and so the maker of the motion and the seconder has an option to take it. Any other further comments?
So my comment is, I think the staffing cost roundtable definitely should pay. However, the cost legal fee for the harassment, any city could get hit with harassment lawsuit, and it could be caused by any of the consultants that the city work with. And it's our responsibility to handle this HR issue and any legal fee. And we cannot really charge a consultant simply because it happened because it's in the process of working with that consultant. So I think Cities Association is our employee. We are responsible for that legal fee. And because this can happen with any other organization that work with Cities Association. And are we going to charge them? It doesn't make legal sense. So I'm not comfortable with that language that we are saying you should pay, even though when you never approved all these investigation, you never approved the attorney, you never gave any comment on how this investigation should be considered, how much, which attorney to pick on this investigation, and then you have to pay. That doesn't seem to make sense. So I'd like to hear other people's comments. Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Philseth?
Well, I kind of agree with Councilmember Zhao, but for a different reason, which is I don't see how we can have a motion that they pay, because I mean, ultimately they're involved in the decision of whether they pay, right? All we can move is our action, right? So our action should be to invoice it, right? Because that's under our control. The rest of it is, it's you're moving stuff that we can't necessarily control, right? But we can. So I think to be procedurally correct about it, the language ought to be, we invoice them for everything, right? And then it's clean. So.
Any other comments? Yes, Treasurer Fliger.
Thank you, and thanks for the comments, Liang and Eric. The point of the executive board's recommendation is to strongly say that we believe the roundtable should pay these bills. And then the second part of the motion, as you'll see, describes what the process looks like, which is sending them the bill so they can invoice the member cities. We thought it was important to make that strong statement at the beginning of the motion that we believe that they should pay these bills. So that's the purpose of that language. So I think it's necessary to include it, but I agree with you, based on the current structure, we can't dictate, unfortunately, that they pay these bills. But I would like to keep that language in the motion that we as a board believe they are responsible and should pay these bills, and accordingly forward the invoices so that they can include it in their budget and bill their member cities.
Any other comments to the motion? And yes, Councilmember Philseth?
Yeah, I understand where Mayor Fleeger is coming from. The only thing I would say is you may have a better chance at getting a unanimous vote, right? if the language changed a little bit.
And so any other comments? Okay, and so seeing no other comments or possible changes by any hands, I will ask Auden to call the question.
Okay, Mock,
Yes.
Mock. Aye. Montano?
Aye.
Montano, aye. Becker? Becker?
Aye.
Becker, aye. Constantine?
Aye.
Constantine, aye. Klein?
Aye.
Klein, aye. Chow?
Nay.
Chow, nay. Abakoga?
Aye.
Abakoga, aye. Jones?
Aye.
Jones, aye. Zhao? Zhao, Saratoga?
Nay. I think we should, I have to agree with Vice Mayor Chow that we need to state that we send all the bills. We can't ask other board. And I don't think we have the authority to tell what the other boards can do. So it's a nay.
Okay, Zhao, nay. And Philseth?
Nay.
Philseth, nay. Flagger?
Yes.
Flagger, aye. Turner?
Yes.
Turner, aye. And Sayak?
Aye.
Sayak, aye. And with 10 ayes and 3 nays, the motion carries.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to turn to my executive board. I know at our last meeting, we had 2 recommendations. The second was with regard to the remaining process. We have not discussed how to move. So we are, at this point, we have made a decision on what to do with bills up to this point. There's still a question of how to proceed. And I think Mayor Zhao, you've mentioned it, as well as Councilmember Philseth. At this point, as Gary has mentioned, I've made it absolutely clear to him not to incur any further costs on anything related to Roundtable. And I just, again, I want to make that absolutely clear. If there is anyone that disagrees with that, you please share that right now. Okay, and then with the executive board, based on this conversation and some other decisions, could I just, the second recommendation we had was with remaining, how to allocate remaining funds. As long as we're all in agreement that Andy and Gary will not spend any further costs on Roundtable, then that answers the second discussion item that we had. And I think we still, yes, Councilmember Abikoga.
Just a question. So if Andy is not staffing the roundtable, I know there's a consultant, will that person staff? Because I think ultimately we need to have the roundtable have a meeting at least to go through the bills that we're sending over to them.
Thank you. That's a good point. There is still some project management that needs to happen. And I do want to acknowledge before we go into any further, I have to acknowledge that my town manager, Ms. Pravetti, as well as Chappie, Vice Mayor Jones's staff have been providing a lot of the staff time that normally would be billed even further. So I want to acknowledge those costs that have been saved on this issue. But that is correct. And so moving forward, Gary will not spend any money on roundtable related issues. Andy has to do minimal work for project management. Those costs, will those costs be billed to the roundtable? Because I want to make sure, I sense the frustration that many of us have as we began this conversation, and as Mayor Zhao of Saratoga said, we don't want just to endlessly spend money if there's no clear purpose where we're going. And we will get an ad hoc committee report in September. And so does everyone feel comfortable charging remaining minimal project management costs to the round table with very little else. So, Vice Mayor Jones, I see your hand raised.
Yes, so I feel comfortable with that. I did have a clarifying question. So if we have a situation where we need Gary to spend some time, maybe reviewing an MOU or something else, would there be a process then where we would approve a certain amount of time? We would communicate that to the roundtable, let them know that, these charges are coming. I'm just trying to understand if we could, at least if we could have some type of interim process so that, we can still continue to do our work.
Right, and that's a very valid scenario example that both Vice Mayor and I have discussed. In my mind, those are costs that legally we would not be incurring if it weren't for the roundtable. So in my mind, that was a cost that would be charged to the roundtable. So that's a perfect example of how do we charge both Andy and Gary's time, given the fiscal situation that we're currently in. So that thank you for raising that example. Vice Councilmember Abikoga.
So I think MOU, drafting an MOU at this point is premature because we have not discussed the future of our relationship with the roundtable. If the roundtable wants to draft an MOU, they're perfectly capable of it. I understand they have legal counsel now, but I would not have our legal counsel initiate drafting any kind of MOU until we have that conversation. I would say we limit the issue to what we voted on in terms of bills, invoices, and have the roundtable have a meeting to discuss those invoices and limit it in that manner. That's the issue at hand, and that's what our staff can work on.
Okay, Vice Mayor Jones?
Yeah, so Margaret, excellent points. Just to clarify, it's actually the roundtable's attorney who's drafting the MOU. So Gary's role would be to review it and provide any feedback that we provide to him in terms of finalizing it. And that would be his role. I just wanted to clarify that, that's the bulk of the work is being done by the roundtable. And then the other question of, do we even pursue any of that work at all before we make a decision to continue to be the fiscal agent for the roundtable? It's one of those in my mind, it's one of those which came first, the chicken or the egg, because I feel that the board should have documentation and a process and agreements in place that they're looking at to make a decision whether this is acceptable or not to move forward with. And if we don't feel it's acceptable or it meets our requirements, then at that point, we should make the decision to sever ties. But if it does, then potentially we can make the decision to continue the relationship. So that's the way I view it, view the process working.
Any comments to that? And if I can, to try and move us towards September is the next meeting. And so if I can, and I'll be very specific so that we can actually have a motion on this so that there's no ambiguity. If we can direct staff and the ad hoc to work to place the bills on a roundtable agenda so that can be discussed as some of our colleagues have said, we can send the invoices to them. Now it's in their court and it determines whether or not, I think it will help determine how to proceed, because if we don't get reimbursed, you saw how little remaining funds we have, and there's very little wiggle room for Gary to spend any time on anything beyond cities association priorities. So is everyone comfortable with that, directing the work that remains to be done specifically to get cost recovery on the bills?
I agree with that. Just real quick, do they have the fund to pay us? Just a question.
Director Jordan, do you?
Yes, they do. especially if they sit. Most of the jurisdictions have been calling me, asking me where their invoices are, and I have told the jurisdictions that they haven't created a budget yet. But most of the cities have a placeholder in their budgets to continue paying for the roundtable. So yes, they do have the funds to pay for this.
Okay, so again, I want to make sure we're absolutely on the same page. Any further work that Cities Association will incur is specific to recovering cost reimbursement on the bills that will be sent.
Do you need a vote or just consensus?
I'm going to look to both Andy and Gary. Do we need a vote on that? Should we?
We have to have a voice vote.
I would like to have a vote on that, yes.
Okay, so I'll make that motion. And Mayor, Council Philseth?
So just quickly, so does the sort of the very low level procedural stuff associated with them having meetings and so forth, is that still something that we're going to provide? I mean, it's the minimal stuff that we talked about earlier.
Do you want me to respond to that?
Yes, please.
Yes,
so as a project manager, I previously was participating in the planning meetings for their agenda. I am no longer doing that.
Okay.
I do still respond to calls from the consultant. They want to know if the roundtable asks them to do something, there always has to be a check back to make sure they have the funds to pay for it. And so the consultant will call and check in with me. They'll call in and check in on procedures. And the time is minimal, but it does. For them to have a meeting, I am usually involved at some level.
So if we approve this motion, they can still have those meetings, or are we shutting down their meetings? Because we shouldn't do that.
Well, this isn't I don't think this is shutting down their meetings.
Okay.
No, I think what we're directing our staff and specifically Andy and Gary to minimize their time.
Yep.
To the roundtable activities.
Yep.
And specifically with Gary to ensure that they have their meeting, whatever needs to happen. And things like an MOU and any other things will not be done until we have further clarification from this board.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks for the clarification. That's helpful.
I appreciate that.
To Chappie's point, I mean, I think both sides here are trying to do the right thing, right? And the plan of record, is the plan of record till there's a new plan of record, and at the moment, we're still their fiscal agent. So, right, so it's just we got to minimize the exposure we put ourselves in, right? So, okay.
Absolutely.
So thanks.
Okay. So, any further questions? So the motion is very specific to cost to allow roundtable to proceed with agenda items necessary for their meetings, but no further work, especially legal work, on anything that's not related to that. That's my motion. Can I have a second?
Second, Constantine.
Okay, and Constantine, if we can call that Auden. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Abikoga, you had a question before we call the question?
Yeah, I just wanted, I don't mean to be really nitpicky, but I do want to make sure that part of that business is that they agendize the invoices that the city's association is sending to them, because it sounds like that's been an issue. So I want to make sure that they agendize those invoices.
Yes.
If that can be included in the motion, that would be helpful to just clarify that.
Absolutely. My intent is to allow a meeting to have this agendized. And so if that's through Andy or through the ad hoc committee, to make sure that that's part of the motion, part of the agenda for those meetings. So, okay, any further questions? And I appreciate everyone asking for that clarity, because it has been quite confusing. Okay, Auden, go ahead and call the question.
Okay, would you mind restating the full motion with the amendment?
Yes, so the full motion is to direct Cities Association staff, Andy and Gary, to limit any work associated with the roundtable to the bare minimum, to create a public meeting for the roundtable board to approve our bills and any other technical work that is necessary to continue their own work.
Thank you, President Sayak.
And the seconder, do you agree with that?
I do.
Okay.
Okay, great. I will call the question. Jones?
Aye.
Jones, aye. Zhao, Saratoga?
Aye.
Zhao, aye. Montano?
Aye.
Montano, aye. Flagger?
Yes.
Flagger, aye. Sayak?
Aye.
Sayak, aye. Filsa?
Aye.
Filsa, aye. Chow?
Aye.
Chow, aye. Mock?
Aye.
Mock, aye. Klein?
Aye.
Klein, aye. Constantine?
Aye.
Constantine, aye. Turner?
Yes.
Turner, aye. Becker?
Aye.
Becker, aye. And Abikoga?
Aye.
Abikoga, aye. And with 13 ayes, the motion carries.
Okay, thank you. So I think this is a great time to adjourn our meeting. And unless anyone wants to continue this conversation, I will work with Andy to ensure that our minutes are sent to the cities so that those who are not present have our minutes as well. And we will just ask our ad hoc committee to relay to our counterparts the decisions that have been made. Director Jordan?
There's a hand up in the hand is down, never mind.
Oh, and before I adjourn, I
no,
do
it's
know
still
that
up.
I have other items of business. So let's make sure we get through that. Thank you for reminding me that. And we do have a city manager's report from Los Gatos Town Manager Pravetti.
Thank you and good evening again. Just very quickly, the city managers met yesterday and we continued our conversations about reopening our respective city halls. We discussed whether or not cities were pursuing vaccination and/or testing requirements. And fortunately, we were able to speak with Dr. Smith, the county executive, about the current status of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also heard presentations regarding stormwater permit updates, as well as encouragement for those cities who have not yet done so to please adopt a suicide prevention policy. So that we've covered a lot of ground yesterday. We're all in different places in terms of reopening our campuses. Everyone's taking a very site-specific approach, and we're just learning as we go. So that's my summary for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pravetti. And Director Jordan, do you have an update? And you're on mute.
Sorry, I just wanted to remind everyone that the Planning Collaborative is starting on its community-wide outreach on the housing element. The effort is called Let's Talk Housing. There is a website, Let's Talk Housing SCC for Santa Clara County. They started with their community-wide outreach meetings this week, and I know that some of you participated in those meetings. So I wanted to make sure that you all had a look so that you could see when the other meetings are. And then also I wanted to remind you that Auden sent an email to everyone that Mountain View has invited us to tour their Life Moves Mountain View. It's their Project Home Key project. Many of you have already seen it, but they have invited the Cities Association board. We are limited to how many members we can take. And so Auden sent you this past week an invitation. You can send Auden a message if you did not receive it, auden@citiesassociation.org. It is Friday, September 10th at 1 p.m. Registration is limited to 17 people. We will be hosted by our second vice president, Councilmember Abakoga, and Mayor Kamei and Councilmember Showalter will be hosting us. And so I think for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a really great project. And that is all I have for you.
Thank you. Would any council member like to share joys and challenges at this time? Okay, and so I'll go to our public, and Roland, I know you had your hand raised, so please join us back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And obviously, you cannot answer this because we're not general public comment. But I was, first of all, I appreciated the answer earlier on, but I was very surprised by the answer. So my follow-up question, and if somebody could follow up with this offline, that'd be appreciated, is as follows: is how could the cities association possibly be a fiscal agent for the roundtable without being incorporated as a 501c something? And that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And are there any other comments? Okay, well, I appreciate all of you making the time today. It is 9:24 and I am adjourning tonight's meeting. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Good night.